Hello, everybody, and welcome to the STEM space. I'm Natasha here. Unfortunately, Claire is off enjoying some family time on her winter break, but in her place, I have a fabulous guest. Carlos Romero has a background in chemical engineering. Carlos, I saw you have a degree at MIT and one from the University of Virginia. And then you have this great career in project management, product development, and the innovation space, working with startups and a whole bunch of different companies. And you're also board member of the National Math and Science Initiative, and you're passionate about making STEM more accessible and inclusive for all students. So we have lots to talk about, but first, Carlos, welcome to the STEM space.
Thank you, Natasha. I'm pretty excited to talk about this. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and happy to talk about it for hours and just share out my experience. And hopefully this will be helpful for somebody in looking at careers, looking at education, and look at the future of what they want to do.
Yeah. And so I would like to just know more about you. I heard a little bit about your background before we hit record, and you were telling me some very interesting experiences you've had. So first, what's your journey been in STEM?
Well, very early on, actually, even at the high school level, I was fortunate enough to be a part of what's called the High School for Engineering Professions in the Houston area, which was a program that was clearly focused on STEM education. And that provided the route to getting into MIT and getting into other schools that really would provide me that STEM education background. And so getting there was, a little bit challenging because not a lot of people that looked like me were taking that route. And so it was very useful to have a family like mine. I come from a pretty large family. I'm the youngest of the males of 9,
Wow.
and I got to see a lot of different exposures to people. Some of my siblings who majored in STEM careers. I'm not in STEM, but the underlying foundation was always the basic skills that STEM provides, and that's basically the math, the science, the ability to do critical thinking, those type of skills that were useful. And so after graduating from the High School for Engineering Professions, I, I decided to attend MIT because I've always been a technologist. I will always be a technologist. But after I graduated from University of Virginia, even though I had a chemical engineering degree, I decided to pursue a different career path in project management and program management, starting out in the food industry, then moving on to the healthcare industry, and then finally landing on with SC Johnson, where consumer products are being developed. And so you would think, what does Windex or any other products that you see at home have to do with chemical engineering? They do, but that wasn't the point of it. The benefit that they saw is that they saw engineers bringing that mindset, the way engineers are trained to think, analyze, look at situations, and develop options and eventually plans to commercialize products. And so that skill set really set me up for success to really be flexible and move from industry to industry. And at this point, with my experience and my STEM training, I can safely say I can go into just about any industry and make an impact. And so you're wondering, like, what do you mean by that? So when somebody hires you, one of the things that they want to know is how can you bring value to the organization? And the value that somebody who's been trained with a STEM background is our ability to identify a situation, identify what the problem is, come up with some potential option solutions, and then outline a plan to make those solutions happen. And so with that background, that helped me really prepare for what I'm currently doing, and that's working with startups and advising them on what to do with technology ideas. Technologists are really excited typically when we identify an idea and we say, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? Which is wonderful, and we need that. But we also need to influence other folks and say, this is a great idea. How can I get your support, maybe through funding, through help? and really identify who your customer and what market you're trying to serve. And so there's a combination of the STEM aspect of it, but also the influencing, the project management skills, uh, all the communication skills that are needed to make a startup into a real business. And so I continue to do that at this moment and share, just ask some basic questions about, have you tested this with consumers? Has anybody else looked at this? What are the things that could trip you up when you're thinking about commercializing your idea? And so all of those things are things that, in my opinion, require skills of critical thinking, analysis, and exploring options.
What's been like the craziest startup idea that has been presented to you? Do you have some interesting ones?
Uh, you're familiar with the Theranos company, it's a
Mm-hmm.
Stanford startup. Well, that idea is actually not a bad idea, but the execution is what really led to where it ended up basically not being commercialized. But that's one of the ideas that's still being evaluated, and basically being able to read without taking a blood sample and measuring different biometrics within your blood, within your body. And so that type of work is still going on. And there are some companies that are close. They're not quite there yet. One of the more challenging things that companies are having issues with is measuring blood pressure. They can measure just about everything else, blood glucose, all the other biometrics that you get from going to a lab and taking a blood sample. But blood pressure seems to be the one that's been most challenging. But I suspect that even that we'll be able to measure without having to put a cuff on your arm and applying pressure, and making it's just not fun. Uh,
Right.
so so yeah, I think that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. I would say within the next 5 years, that'll be out in the market.
One of the concerns that teachers have, because brought up critical thinking, right? And
Mm-hmm.
problem solving and being able to, identify the problem, who's the customer. Um, and I think teachers are feeling a little intimidated with now having to teach engineering and more STEM workforce development skills because they're like, it's constantly changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI has hit education and now it's like transforming how we teach and then how we train engineers. Um, what is your advice for teachers that are trying to like prepare students for jobs that probably don't exist yet, but may and will change in the next 10, 15 years when their kids graduate?
Right. And so I think focusing on the fundamentals is what's critical. Yes, project management skills and all the other stuff that I mentioned is wonderful. But to me, that's an enhancement of the basic skills. If you have the basic skills, you can build on those and provide another layer of understanding of how teams work. It's really teamwork. I know that some schools have incorporated teamwork into some of their courses, and you don't have to be a project manager creating Gantt charts or doing all the stuff that project managers do, but it's understanding the basic skills, problem solving, communication. Communication is a huge one that it's a technology environment we miss out on. A lot of engineers are challenged, frankly, to communicate their ideas. And so that starts at the very bottom, very early on in education. How do you communicate? How are you able to translate a complex situation into something that's simple, that's easy to understand? And so to me, it's more about the fundamentals than, going after the latest uh, approach. Like, for example, in project management, one of the things that keeps on being brought up is agile techniques. Agile techniques is not what makes you successful in project management. It's really the fundamentals, the basics, understanding what is it that we're trying to solve for. What are
Mm,
some options? Just brainstorming, understanding at the very basic what you're trying to solve for. And so some of the other skills are nice and you can help develop them, but it all starts with fundamentals.
right.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about increasing pathways to STEM. I've worked with students in lots of different schools, but particularly San Antonio.
Mhm.
And one of the barriers I noticed was just lack of understanding of STEM and like what an engineer does and how that's a possible pathway. So it's just like exposing students to different careers is one piece, but then also getting them motivated to persevere through these really hard classes. What is your take on how can we make STEM more inclusive?
So NEMS, NEMC or an NMSI is an organization that helps with that. I mean, they have a way of helping educators bring STEM to life and make it more accessible for those students who don't have access to those opportunities. Um, you don't have to look far. There's many universities that have STEM programs, and students are just not aware that they exist. And just exposing them to those programs and sharing the opportunities that already exist can help them at least get exposed. And what I tell kids is, you don't have to become an engineer, but you really if you focus on a STEM education, you can go in different directions. You don't have to become an engineer per se, but you can take it into the business world. If you go, for example, to Goldman Sachs or those big banking institutions in New York, they hire engineers for that same reason, or folks that have STEM backgrounds, mathematicians. Sometimes say, well, what am I going to do with a math degree, right? You can go into investment banking. You can go into many fields. That leverage your skills of analysis, again, problem solving, everything that's STEM related. Uh, you can go in basically just about any industry that you can think about because the skills are the same. We're always
Right.
solving problems. Yes.
Earlier, you said when you were starting out, there weren't a lot of people that look like you in the
Mhm.
STEM field. Why is representation important?
So it's important because being human beings, we like to emulate others, especially somebody that we look up to, maybe somebody who's older than us, somebody who's been successful in that field. And so if we see somebody else who's been in that field and shown that they can exist, persevere, and grow in it, then it's an inspiration for us. For me, like I was telling you, I had older siblings. I was fortunate to see that like one of them had a PhD in physics. So I said, okay, well, he's my brother. I think he did it. I think I can do it. Maybe not go to physics, but and so similar to that, like hey, there was another one who was a doctor, and so I have a variety of, and I didn't explicitly look at them and say like I want to be just like them, but I think just being exposed to that and being exposed to the values of pursuing something higher, setting higher expectations for yourself from an educational point of view, uh, not being afraid to being challenged. A lot of times kids get afraid like, oh, that's going to be a hard class. You
Mhm.
don't really know until you start going through it. And so getting over the stigma of thinking that math and science is scary and difficult and it's not cool. Well, guess what? Everything that you see now is STEM related. Look at computers, look at everything that you see online. All that was created by STEM educated folks. Um,
Right.
all the creative material that happens has STEM behind it. It's just that it's not something that gets highlighted. You don't say, "Oh,
Mhm.
by the way, somebody who has a STEM background just created this video," or somebody who did, created this new phone that does X, Y, Z. A STEM educated person did that.
Right.
And so I think it's connecting something tangible to the other in the education part of it that leads to that. Uh, People don't see it. They just assume, well, I have a computer, so everything will be okay. No, somebody has to
Mhm.
maintain the computer. A STEM educated person does that.
Mhm.
Uh, Everything that you see around you, sensors, cars, AI, of course, AI is a hot topic that everybody talks about. And I think, again, there's this like scary feeling about what AI is going to do. AI is not going to do anything. AI is going to make even better.
Right.
And again, the training that's required to understand AI and to leverage it so that we can do even more things and more creative things, more productive things, requires a STEM background. It's all
Mhm.
about it's the same fundamentals of understanding, coming up with solutions, asking tough questions, really getting at the root of what we're trying to understand.
I've heard from teachers the hardest subject for their students is math. It's the hardest one to keep them motivated because they always come back with, when am I ever going to have to use algebra? When do I need calculus? And often the teachers have a hard time making that connection to a real application where they see, engineering projects, science projects. It's a very clear connection.
Hmm.
So, what advice do you have for teachers that are struggling to get their kids to stick with the math?
I think something even more tangible, because sometimes science and engineering can have like a longer term type effect where you understand how one interacts with the other, with the math that goes into doing engineering projects. Something as simple as you know keeping a bank account. Money is always
Yeah.
something that drives people to understand. Like, people always want money, but they don't know where it goes or how it works. They just know they need to get paid and they need to pay bills. That to me is like a really simple, tangible understanding of what math is. You get money from one part, you spend it somewhere else. And so there's simple operations there that can help you think about, okay, math is not that bad. It's actually pretty simple. And, that's one of the examples that I think of that can get them started. Just and if you want to look at science experiments, there's some science experiments where you can show simple cause effect type of situations where you can apply simple math, without getting too caught up in those fancy equations that engineers later on do in their careers. But So those are the ones that I can think of. Uh, Budgeting your time, just thinking about how you spend your time. You have a limited amount of time. How much of that time is spent, and that requires some math. Thinking about it, do I want to spend 50% of my time doing playing video games,
Hmm.
and then the rest whatever? And so examples like that, I think, are useful for students to understand that math is not a foreign language. It's actually something that you use every day. Sometimes you use it implicitly. Sometimes you actually think about it, but it's around you every day. So,
Hmm. And I think you said, don't overwhelm them with the fancy equations that
yeah.
engineers use, but also make them aware that engineers do use math because
Oh, yeah.
often K-12, we're building something out of cardboard and paper, and the
Right.
kids never make the connection that a real engineer would actually be using some equations here
That's
and some
right.
mathematical modeling. And that gap, there's a big gap there in what kids think engineering is and then what ends up actual engineering is.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I remember doing for my kids when they were in elementary school is I would attend and share things like patents and the idea of patents and what a patent is. And you'd be surprised. They really became engaged when they said, wait a minute, so why did you do that? Why did you develop a patent on XYZ? What were you thinking about? And to me, that automatically sparks that curiosity that if you get them engaged to ask questions like that, on their own, they'll begin to ask for more information. That way, you can
Mhm.
tie their curiosity to fundamentals in math and science. And again, you don't have to go crazy. It's just simple concepts. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that made me really excited because now I'm already thinking curriculum ideas with patents. I had never considered that because we
You could,
talked.
yeah, I was
I
going to
mean, there's
say,
so much you could do.
you can reach out. I mean, there's, engineers are everywhere. You just have to look out for them. Most
Right.
larger organizations have, the ability to provide, somebody like an engineer or a scientist to come and present at your school. I, I've done it. I've always done it. I've done science fairs. I do them all the time. And they're happy to share because nobody really ever asks you to tell me what an engineer does or tell me what a patent is. Tell me about the work that you're doing now. Uh, because it's not, it's part of it is it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that you see in the media for other things. But if you invite an engineer or a scientist to come and just give even a 30-minute talk about what they do, you'd be surprised at how much interest you're able to garner.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some challenges you faced in your engineering career? Whether, it was like you've done a lot of this like tech-based product development, but I'm just curious, like in general, was there some like key moments that you're like, "Ooh, that was hard, but I got through it."
So the most challenging part was probably convincing a business person, again, that technology approach or idea was one that was feasible, or that had, from a business point of view, value. Again, it gets back to how do I need to translate this amorphous technology idea into something that's tangible? And so translating what I thought to me was an obvious technology, somebody else didn't understand it. And so I spent a lot of time in actually a lot of time that I spent at SC Johnson was just understanding the consumer and how consumers view products. So gaining an understanding of how human beings work with products, how
Mm,
they, what is it that they're looking for in a product. That was huge because that I could take that and translate it into a technology, or the other way around. I can take a technology that can address a consumer need, and now I've done my work. I can do that. If you can do that, then people will understand. Okay, I get it. You're doing this to get that, and this helps me do that. And so I think that's the most challenging part of being an engineer in a business world. But it's also the most exciting because once you find that insight that makes it happen, all sorts of things begin to happen. Promotional activity, going to market type of approaches, uh, just a number of different options open up. And again, from my perspective as an engineer, your job is to come up with options and
mm,
really come up with options that lead to solutions. And so yeah, consumer insights is perhaps like the most exciting for me as an engineer now, that really keeps me in this space. Even if it's with startups, that's one of the questions that I ask startups. Do you know what the patient wants? They're
right.
developing this medical device that does XYZ. And I'll say, have you given it to a patient to see if they can even open it up or turn it on?
Mm,
And that's okay because we don't think about that when we're in the middle of developing something, a new technology, a new product. We're so focused on making it work that we forget that somebody else has to interact with it. And so
yeah.
gaining that part of it really makes you valuable and helps you, in a sense, reduce the amount of work that you have to do because you're focused on something else when really that's not what your consumer or the end user is focused on.
Right. And that's great because we do in STEM classrooms, we have these engineering design challenges. You
Hmm.
identify the problem, you brainstorm ideas, you develop it, test it until it works. And we
Right.
often skip the step about, does the customer like it?
Yeah.
Will it sell? How would they interact with it? And so I think this is a really great point for teachers out there. How can you do some market research with these ideas so your kids come up with a solution, go and ask their parents, go ask the other classroom next door to try it out, to get some input, and
That's
think
right.
about it not just from what I like, but from what someone else likes.
Yeah, and it all really depends. I remember one of the projects that I worked on when I was with SC Johnson. We were developing products for markets outside of the U.S. and consumers are not the same in other parts of the world. And so
Mm,
it's really exciting to bring these prototypes, ugly looking prototypes, and saying, what do you think about it? And I would say, you're not gonna hurt me if you tell me you don't like me. Tell me that you don't like it. Tell me why you don't like it, because that'll be a information for me to improve it, make it better, make it fit more for what you're looking for. And so that was really exciting because I learned a lot about people, period. And that has nothing to do with STEM. It just has to do with understanding people. Um,
right.
that people around the world are different. They use products differently. Their focus is different. So all of that, I guess it is also a STEM. You're gathering information, trying to understand it, trying to create a model around it, and hopefully use that model to generate even more ideas. And so in that same sense, in one tool that you can always use if you don't have time to go and ask your neighbors about your idea, like what you were mentioning in your class, you can go into Chat GPT and ask it, I'm doing XYZ. And that'll be one way of looking at it. That's not the only way of looking at it. But there's a number of ways that you can get understanding, whether it's to AI or, like you said, really the best approach really is to face-to-face interaction, one-on-one interaction, even with your own family. Sometimes I would bring prototypes home and say, I would give it to my 5-year-old and say, "Here, do you know what this is?"
I love that.
He would look at it and, like, I don't know. Like I said, what do you think you should do with it? And he would play around with it. Eventually, he would put it together. But if you looked at him, you would learn a lot about how he's thinking about the product, how the
Mhm.
different parts came together, kind of like the Lego thing. I guess I don't know if you guys still do Legos, but that's
Yeah.
another way of you have a whole bunch of parts. You need to develop something that does XYZ. What are the parts that you need? How do you assemble them? What does this thing look like? And then at the end, is it going to work? And is anybody
Mhm.
going to understand what you did? And so, those were really exciting times. And even now, I'll periodically pick out products that I've never seen before and try to play around with them to see what they do. And more importantly, if they do what they say they do, because you see claims all the time on products that say, oh, this thing does XYZ, and it really doesn't do all that. It really does one thing well. And
Mhm.
so, really, really fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm just picturing this a teacher just putting up pictures of a patent for the class and having them try to figure out what it is, and then it revealing what it was meant to do. I think that
Yeah.
could just be a really easy way to introduce that to their students.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I found is that another way of learning, similarly, you can look up products that failed commercially and ask the question,
Ooh,
why did they fail?
yeah, I like that.
That's one that uh, companies generally companies miss out on lessons learned about why a product failed or why a project didn't do well. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't, but I think that's invaluable information, because then you learn about
Mhm,
your product category or whatever it is that you're doing. And that's even more useful than going out and doing new research, because you don't want to repeat the same mistakes you did before. And
right.
so, that's another lesson you can think about for educators you can bring to the school. And, you can either ask, why is this thing not work? Or how can you make it better? Or what is
Mhm,
wrong with this product?
yeah,
That automatically generates a lot of conversation and thought provoking type questions where you can say, well, maybe it's this. And then you can begin to map out an idea mapping of what could be the problem.
mhm. Yeah, I love that. Oh gosh, so many good ideas. Well, okay, Carlos, this has been a great conversation. Like you said, we could be talking for hours on
I
this topic.
literally could. Yes.
So I'm gonna just ask one final question of the future. What do
Mhm.
you hope for the future of STEM education, and how can we improve, this STEM space?
So it really should not be STEM education and then everything else. It should really be a foundational uh, aspect of a curriculum for all kids. And again, you don't have to reach the high level of, engineering, high level math, but every kid that graduates from K through 12 should have that basic STEM understanding. Just the basics. You don't need to be, advanced STEM, because I think people associate STEM with something, and it really shouldn't be called that. That's part one. The other part that I wish would communicate to kids is that STEM gives you flexibility in terms of career paths. It doesn't tie you down to any one thing. Um, you know, uh, will you become rich and famous? Maybe, maybe not, but that's not the point. You have to look at it long-term objectives of what you're doing as a student, what you'll be doing as a grown up, as a citizen, as part of society, and how you can add value, contribute to society. And I think STEM education provides that foundation and skill set that helps you contribute to society. You don't have to be an engineer to contribute. You can contribute in other ways that utilize those STEM skills. Um, and so I wish that everybody that graduates from high school has the fundamentals on STEM. And again, tie them to career paths, make sure that they understand, because I don't think they do. Uh, they see what they see in the media. The media doesn't focus on STEM education. But, interesting things like, for example, all the space work that's been going on. And I think you're a space engineer, aren't you?
Yep, aerospace.
Yeah. That's another field. I know somebody who is a space engineer who is now in investment banking. What is the
Oh,
connection? Amazing, right? You would have thought.
yeah.
Right. Last time I saw him, I said, I thought you were like building rockets or something. He said, no, I'm working on Bitcoin. And I'm like,
Oh
what?
my God.
So that was like really taking in. And so see, that just underlies the fact that a STEM education can provide you with options that otherwise won't be there necessarily. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't see STEM education going away. The need for it is going to increase, as a matter of fact, because it's a technology driven society that we live in. Everything that we do,
Mhm.
like I said earlier, is driven by technology, and we're going to need people that understand math, science. Quantum computing is another area that's huge, that's growing. And frankly, the pipeline for that industry is not that big. So we need to start now, building the foundation, the education, the talent that's going to support initiatives like quantum computing, AI,
Mhm.
continuation of robotics that's already well underway. At one point, I remember robotics was like not everybody did it. Now everybody's doing it. And so we need
Right.
to bring that similar type of vigor and interest to other areas of science uh, that's going to be needed. And healthcare is a huge one. I mean, we're making huge strides, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking your earlier comment of it's not just STEM education and everything else, right? STEM
right.
is for all kids, and we should work together because all we're trying to do is prepare kids for the future.
That's right.
So I think we have the same mission. Thank you for joining me today on the STEM space and sharing your story and sharing your passion for STEM education. Maybe we'll bring you back again in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I could talk about it for hours, but I know we only have a few minutes, but I'm happy to come back or join. If anybody feels like reaching out, I'm on LinkedIn. If
Yep,
you need me
we'll
to
add
come
your
and give
link.
a chat at your school or wherever,
Yeah.
I can do that as well.
Where are you based out of? You're in Chicago?
Northern suburbs, far northern suburbs. But if I need to come into Chicago, it's not an issue. Yeah, happy to do
Great.
so.
Well, any listeners out there in that area, reach out to Carlos. Well, thank you again so much for joining me today.
All righty, thank you.